This meeting is being recorded.
So welcome everyone to the February 16 meeting of our Digital Cooperation and Diplomacy session. I'm Vince Cerf, and this is my last opportunity to chair the meeting. I'll continue to participate as I am able, but of course the chairman is sort of mandatory, and I will do the best I can to be a continuing participant. I think that all the credit, of course, for these meetings goes to Mei Lin, who organizes them, manages to entice people to participate, and then provides me with an agenda so that I actually appear to know what I'm doing. But the real credit for all of these meetings goes to Mei Lin, and who will continue as chairman of PCI and as the organizer of the DCD event. So you will not lose very much by my departure. And at the end of the meeting, we'll introduce my replacement, who is amply equipped to continue. So the important thing about these meetings is twofold, really. One of them is the exchange of information that results from this. And my impression is that a number of interactions occur post-meeting where people have discovered each other, which is the other side of this coin, which is people who might not ever have bumped into each other are facilitated. Their meeting is facilitated by Mei Lin's organization of these 2-hour sessions. And that, I think, is a huge contribution, because the world is large and many people are doing many things. And knowing about the ones that might be relevant to your own work turns out to be harder to come by.
Been very successful. We've had, the biggest glitch we've had is with technology.
Let's see. I'm sorry, are you saying that we're having a glitch now, or are you just, no, okay. So the important point here is to continue to work on these problems and to continue the exploration that Mei Lin has initiated. So with that, and considering it's now 10:05, which by our schedule says that Hinrich Türken is going to tell us about the G7 presidency and his new role in climate change. So Hinrich, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Vint, and let me also stress it was really a pleasure and an honor to be with this group right from the beginning, and I still have very fond memories of meeting Mei Lin for the first time in the margins of the Paris Peace Forum. I think it was 2019, I'm not sure, yes. So this was the remarkable moment that somehow led to this gathering that we have here. Yes, I'm happy to report on what we have in store and in mind for the German G7 presidency, which is this year. And first of all, I'd like to state that, of course, we want to have continuity. So we are building upon the digital policy priorities and achievements of the predecessors of the UK's G7 presidency. This is a good practice, and I think in this special field, it's also very worthwhile. The program of our G7 digital ministers track is called Digital Progress in an Inclusive Global Order. Could somehow be taken from this very group that's coming together here. So what we want to particularly focus on sectoral and cross-sectional cooperation and consolidation towards strengthening an inclusive global digital order that promotes an open, interoperable, reliable, and secure internet. And I'm sure, Vint, you like what you hear on this regard. So what do we do? We have 3 priority issues I'd like to dwell upon briefly. One is digitalization and environment. The second is international standardization. And the third one is data. First item, digitalization and environment. So we see sustainability and the wish to combat climate change as being a priority to the entire German G7 presidency. And you might have noticed that our new government includes the Green Party again, and our foreign minister is the former chairperson of the Green Party. So this is fairly understandable. We see two strands of action here. First is to harness the potential of digitalization for environmental sustainability. I think this is obvious. And the second is to reduce the energy and resource consumption caused by digital transformation. And if I understand correctly, Mylin, this is the very subject you will be working upon when you join the Hasse-Plattner Institute later this year. So we want to use the G7 presidency to underpin these ambitious goals that were already adopted at the last G7 summit in Carbis Bay. We want to underpin it with concrete action, and we propose to agree on energy efficiency benchmarks for data centers and to develop a digital toolbox for SMEs for the digital and sustainable business transformation. So these are the concrete action points. Second field is international standardization. What we want to achieve is we want to promote the development of standards and norms in a way that reflects values and interests in the G7. And this is very important to us to have a look at the values themselves. We believe that digital technical standards are also critical to the digital and green global transformation. We want standardization projects to follow recognized principles, and the G7 wants to coordinate better in international bodies such as ISO, IEC, and ITU, some of which are represented here in this meeting. We value industry-led multi-stakeholder approach to international standardization. And our goal is to not instrumentalize the international standardization system for geopolitical reasons, because we see that there is some trend to try and exert influence via standardization. But it is still unclear on how we can possibly deal with this instrumentalization of standardization by other actors in the field. So how we can counter and respond to these attempts that we see in some bodies. We would like to focus on common rules as positive messages and not try to seek a compartmentalization of technology or an alliance against any given actor. So we want to have common rules, positive messages, and no containment. So what we plan concretely on this field is a multi-stakeholder expert workshop with government, industry, and standardization organizations. And secondly, a political high-level multi-stakeholder event to decide upon the various strategies and to achieve these goals. For the third sector, the data sector, we would like to propose a plan of action with the support of OECD and based on a roadmap developed by the British presidency. And this plan of action should approximate essential rules and standards for international transfers of industry data, not private data, but industry data, with the goal of supporting and facilitating the establishment of international data spaces, for example, via common technical standards, tools, and infrastructure. And we still have to discuss whether the plan should be horizontal, cross-sectional, or focus on specific sectors such as health, or there are other candidates like agriculture. And the fourth item I'd like to mention in addition is safety tech or e-safety. And there the objective would be to provide and develop solutions that enable safer online experiences and protect users from illegal and harmful content, contacts or conduct such as hate speech. And to this end, we propose to set up an event to share best practices and discuss political needs and possible solutions to new and emerging problems with a particular focus on the young people, young and elderly users as well. Perhaps I also qualify soon for an elderly user of the internet, I have to see. So how do we want to go about this? The process will be taken through the G7 digital ministers process. And besides the digital and tech ministers track, we would also like to use the Foreign Affairs sous-chef track for those of you who are aficionados of the G7 process. So there's the leaders track, that is the prime minister, heads of governments, And we have the Sherpas, and then there are Foreign Affairs sous-Sherpas, which is our Director General in the Foreign Office, to support also policy priorities with regard to digital diplomacy and digital foreign policy, addressing possibly such issues like AI governments, tech decoupling, and cybercrime. And the first meeting of this Foreign Affairs sous-Sherpas actually does take place tomorrow. What has happened so far? The first meeting of the Digital and Tech Working Group took place last week, and the proposed priorities were discussed and presented and got wide support by the G7 member states. So the next steps would be to finalize our program for the digital minister track based on the feedback, also written feedback of other G7 member states, which we are currently collecting and reviewing. And in May 10 and 11, we will have the meeting of digital and tech ministers of the G7. And a couple of days later, also in May, 12th to 14th of May, we will have the meeting of foreign ministers of the G7, where we would also like to present the issue of the geopolitics of new technologies. We see this as an upcoming field for foreign policy decision-making and foreign policy action. And our feeling is this is really not being given enough attention as it should be internationally. There will be a couple of multi-stakeholder events, which I touched upon briefly. One is on the April 6th, a multi-stakeholder event covering the topics of data and data governance. And it all leads up to our G7 Leaders Summit, which is going to take place in southern Germany in Elmau, 26th to 28th of June. And this basically is the highlight of our G7 presidency, which is not concluded with this summit, but basically the main pillars of the work program that we have set ourselves will then be implemented or decided upon. And there will be other meetings coming up later in the year, but they will not, let's say, have the heavy burden of pushing forward the agenda. So this is basically the program that we have foreseen for our G7 presidency this year. And just to finalize, you will also see the much younger face of Nico Geide in this meeting. I'd like to introduce him. He will be my successor in this eminent group. He will represent the voice of the Federal Foreign Office here, and he's a very good thinker and has already collected quite substantial experience in the field of tech diplomacy, digital diplomacy, and I'm very happy that he's agreed to take over my post here. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Henrik, and thank you for that introduction. Several things occur to me as I listen to your very concise summary, so I draw your attention to them. The first thing, you mentioned standards groups like ISO, IEC, and ITU. You didn't happen to mention IETF and the W3C, and I want to be reassured that the G7 is aware of their existence because they are the place where a great deal of internet standardization takes place. So that's one point. The second thing that you mentioned, which I also want to strongly endorse, is providing for international transfers of data in the internet. It's pretty clear that while privacy is an important thing to protect, and we all recognize the importance of the GDPR, for example, the ability to move data around in the internet is really a vital part of its utility. So I want to strongly endorse efforts to assure that we don't fragment the internet for all information transfers, since that would undermine a great deal of the value of the network. So you've actually been so concise that we actually have a few minutes according to the agenda for any comments or questions that others might have for Hinrich. So I'll pause for a moment and see if there are any questions or comments.
Yes, I wanted to just mention, I am really wonderfully reassured about the heavy components of digital in the G7 agenda. And it was not something that was apparent to me in the Think 7, which I was participating in. And so, Hinrich, I don't know if you're going to be here for the whole time, but I'd like to draw your attention to the slides that are in the agenda. And if you could perhaps take a look at them. Nico also, welcome Nico, because we'd like to bring forward these notions that we've raised about digital in the only forum that we were invited to participate in. But I think it's important for us to actually bring this in. And I think Jane Coffin might want to say something.
Hi, Malin. I don't need to say much. I just wanted to repeat the important words that Vint had just noted about the IETF and the W3C, and just to flag for all of us the importance of interoperable and open routing through the current way we do routing across the internet. So thank you very much for the opportunity to say something, and good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone.
Thanks so much, Jane. Any other comments before we move on to the next agenda item?
I have
Elon,
one.
yes, I see your hand
Just
up.
a quick question to clarify. Thank you very much for the introduction and the ideas. I just wanted to know a little more about the format of the expert workshops. And you talked about a multi-stakeholder process. And this is something that now this European Green New Deal, or the Real Deal project, is specifically addressed to. And so it would be very helpful to know a little more about how that is envisioned, that in terms of the G7 process.
You want me to respond, Vint?
Yes, please, unless you're trying to avoid it.
No, I'm not avoiding any question. First, be assured we look at many, if not all, standardization bodies. And the fact that I did not mention them was just to be concise. There are many more to be mentioned, and I'm sure that Nico listened carefully. I will make sure that this is really well taken note of and being pushed through. About the workshop, Ilan, we would have to find out with the actual hosts, which is not us because we are not the digital ministers, but our colleagues. But we can make sure that we send information perhaps to Mylin, and she can distribute it if there is a chance to, let's say, invite oneself or to make suggestions for attendees for the workshops. I'm not sure about the setup, but we'll make sure we get the information and spread it to you. And thirdly, Vint, of course, we are all supportive of an internet that allows free flow of data, and respectful of the GDPR and other data privacy regulations, but we will want to sequester any part of the internet from others. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Dorothy Gordon had a comment. So Dorothy, you're next.
Yeah, thank you for an excellent summary, and thank you for giving me the floor, Vince. I've noticed that very often we have these kind of discussions, and because of the nature of the partnership, we have certain countries excluded, even though they're very important in the geopolitics of digital today. So I'm just wondering how you'll be reaching out to China and how you will be reaching out to the Russian Federation, for example.
I think that was a question for you, Henrik.
Yeah, part of the G7 exercise is always the question, which countries do you invite to which meetings? And we've had a discussion for the leaders and for the foreign ministers. I'm sure there's also a discussion of which I'm not part and parcel of for who to invite for the digital ministers meeting, but we'll make sure that this point is taken, and you're absolutely right. It is of no added value to preach to the converted if you have difficulties with other partners who are outside the group. So we'll make sure that some of these are also invited. But Nico, do you have any information on who the guests will be for the G7 digital ministers?
Thanks, Henrik, and hi everyone. Thanks for this opportunity to briefly join the discussion here. As Henrik mentioned, the list of guest attendees is not finalized. Dorothy, you mentioned China and Russia. I suspect they will probably not be on the guest list as they have not been traditionally attending G7 meetings. But the point you're making is absolutely crucial, of course. And I mean, there is the G20 as a format that would provide an opportunity to take up these issues also with a broader range of partners and discuss also with Russia and China about these issues. Indonesia is in the G7 presidency this year. I know, Mylin, that you worked on a paper with Hasso-Plattner Institute on clean IT that has been submitted to the Indonesian G20 presidency. I actually have a meeting tomorrow with Hasso-Plattner Institute to discuss this further. Yeah, on the guests for the G7, no finalists so far, but Russia and China most likely better to be addressed in the G20 forum.
A truly diplomatic answer. Well done, Nico. I think generally speaking, the G7 might choose to formulate within the G7 how it would approach others, including China and Russia, probably better done in their absence. So unless there are other questions, Dorothy, I assume that hand up is an old one now, and that you don't need to ask another question. We will move on now to Yuping Chan, who is wonderful to have her participating because of her attention to UN efforts on Global Digital Compact and the Digital Cooperation Roadmap, which has been under evolution now for quite some time. So Yuping, if you're here, please take the microphone.
Thank you so much, Vint, and thank you so much to Mei-Lin and Vint for inviting our office to be here today to brief on some of the work that we've been doing over the last year and some of the work that we have upcoming with the Global Digital Compact. I think a number of the stakeholders and those around the table are quite aware of the work that's been underway to implement the Secretary General's roadmap in the priority areas of global connectivity, digital inclusion, digital human rights, capacity building, and so forth. And I think we've had actually some parts of the UN system, such as UNDP and ITU, be part of this engagement with all of you and have kept you up to date with a lot of the work that's been ongoing on the digital cooperation roadmap. I think, as you'll know, our office was only established last year and has been quite small, but really trying to rev up the work around bringing together the UN system to implement the key recommendations of the Secretary General in the roadmap and really bring forward these key themes of universal connectivity, digital capacity building. And there have been a number of achievements, I think, over the last year in terms of concrete work, new partnerships, and new, I think, work streams that will come online this year as well. So for instance, Alex Wong from ITU is here. He might also be briefing on the work that's been done with the Partner to Connect Coalition, the upcoming baseline framework on measuring universal meaningful connectivity that the ITU will be producing later this year as part of the follow-up to the digital cooperation roadmap. So there's been quite a lot of work, I think, at the UN system around the Secretary General's vision in the roadmap of a more open, free, and secure digital future for all. One of the key elements as well has been the strengthening of the IGF, and colleagues who've been following this process will know that at the Polish IGF last year, there really has been some forward momentum in terms of the recommendations of the roadmap in strengthening the IGF. And the key one, I think, will be the establishment and announcement of the IGF leadership panel, hopefully in the next 1 or 2 months, where we really think that this will help elevate the profile of the IGF by having a high-level, esteemed body that will be able to lift the IGF's discussions and give it the primacy and the relevance in international fora that the IGF really deserves because of the importance of the multi-stakeholder approach and the discussions that occurred yearly at IGF. So the roadmap has been really being taken forward by the UN agencies. We've been so lucky to have the partnership of many of you around the table and the institutions, member states, and stakeholders as well. The next step in part of this evolution of the UN's thinking is now what we call the Global Digital Compact. The Secretary General issued his Common Agenda report last September, which is not just about digital, but really his view on the stake of multilateralism in the next 25 to 50 years, the global priorities, and what is really needed to reinvigorate the international community and the work of the United Nations. So this Common Agenda report actually includes 90 proposals that span the whole gamut, not just in digital, but on peace and security, financing, sustainable development, environment, and so forth, with the Digital Compact as the key element in terms of digital-related initiatives. And what the Secretary General has proposed is that at a summit of the futures to take place in September 2023, there will be a number of key issues to be put on the table, including outer space, peace and security, youth and future generations. But one of these key elements, because the very importance of digital issues, would be a multi-stakeholder technology track that could agree on a digital compact that would involve not just member states, but also stakeholders, private sector, civil society as well. And we see this as an opportunity to have a once in a lifetime agreement on key principles for the digital future that we want, that is based around this precise vision of an open, free, and secure internet. And so there is a lot of resonance, I think, what Hendrik had just said about the G7 and this idea that we need to be more united in how we see the digital space. And we at the United Nations, being the Universal Forum of 193 member states, and really building on the stakeholder engagement and partnership that we've been able to catalyze over the last few years to the high-level panel, the Digital Cooperation Roadmap, think that perhaps the time is right to have this conversation here at the United Nations with all our stakeholder partners about this precise digital future and these principles that should unite us all. So you'll see that in the Common Agenda report, for instance, the Secretary General lays out several issues that could be part of the digital compact, one of which is internet fragmentation that we've heard discussed already and really is a growing concern. Another one also the protection of data, which also is, as Hendrik has mentioned, something that is very critical in the international community. And what we are doing now at the United Nations is starting to embark on a very informal sort of listening consultations exercise where we hope to solicit inputs from international processes, institutions, coalitions, consortiums, NGOs, stakeholders, as to what should be in this global digital compact. And we're hoping at the United Nations that we will be able to collect all these collective inputs and wisdom as a basis to then begin the discussions on the digital compact. Some of you who are following the discussions here in New York a little bit more closely will know that the President of the General Assembly, who is the lead of the member states on this issue, is convening a discussion next week on a number of proposals in the Common Agenda, including the Digital Compact. A number of stakeholders are intending to participate there to signal their engagement with this process, their desire to contribute to this. I would also be a bit remiss if I don't mention the fact that there is a little bit of pushback here at the United Nations on this whole issue of can it be multi-stakeholder? This is not just on digital per se, but a little bit across the entire Common Agenda strand, where there is a sense where some countries feel that the future of the United Nations and the work on the Common Agenda should be more state-led and government-led versus a little bit more of a broader approach, and that some of the Secretary General's proposals might be a little bit too forward-leaning for this time, and that it's up for the member states to really discuss and give the direction. On the digital space, I think, however, there really is a feeling where the time is right. And maybe it's because of all the work that we've been doing collectively in forums like this to really sensitize the ground to the need for urgent action. And so we're hoping, and very hopeful actually, that the digital compact will be one of these areas where the member states will realize the urgency of taking multi-stakeholder action and really coming to some kind of discussion on the key principles that we need for the digital future. And so next week, we will be listening to the member states and on their views on what the digital compact should be, whether we should even try for a digital compact and what they think about the process surrounding it. But we at the Office of the Tech Envoy have been quite behind the scenes, really pushing this idea that this is what is needed. It is not a legally binding agreement, but it could be the beginning of this important discussion and coming together to find shared areas of agreement, principles, and perhaps voluntary commitments to bring about these key principles among all the key digital stakeholders. We would really be grateful for the support of all around the table. And perhaps, for instance, maybe Hendrik, you could, the G7 process that you're leading, for instance, contribute some elements towards what you think, idea that it's not about alliances against a particular group of actors, but it's more about a uniting vision around shared values is really the same animating principle behind our hope that the United Nations can forge the digital compact and be a platform to bring all these voices together.
Wow. I always like the level of energy that you project into all of these meetings, Yuping. It's amazing. Several things that you said really grabbed my attention. One of them is the multi-stakeholder question. I think that the nation states need to be reminded that the bulk of investment in digital technology and its implementation and its operation comes out of the private sector. The amount of available investment money is dwarfed by the private sector relative to what governments are able to spend. So I think it's very important for the UN to appreciate that the way in which digital technology influences things is heavily influenced by the private sector, and therefore a multi-stakeholder approach is important, not only because of the private sector, but because of the general public, which is plainly the largest consumer of the technology and its application. So that's one point. The second point, with regard to brief mention of outer space, and I wanted to emphasize something which is currently underway. The interplanetary internet is quite real. There is an effort that's been going since 1998 and it's reaching a very important moment as the new interplanetary protocols are going to be applied to the return to the moon, and we hope, of course, to subsequent missions to Mars. The moon effort involves something called the Artemis Accords, at least the US effort does. And the Artemis Accords are, in a sense, a compact, an agreement about how we will operate off the planet. And it covers a substantial amount of territory. It's not just communications, but it's private sector engagement. What does it mean to own something? Can you open a mine and own the results? Can you mine the asteroids? So there are a wide range of considerations that have gone into that. I think it's extremely timely that the September 2023 date was chosen to explore this very broad set of topics. So can you say whether there will be meetings leading up to the September 2023 event? And maybe you could provide that information to Mei-Lin for further distribution, so we'll have an idea of what's coming between now and then. You're muted.
I'm happy to.
Thank you.
On this question about meetings, this is a part of the slightly tricky conundrum that we, the UN Secretariat, are facing with the member states. Because the member states, as I mentioned, some of them feel that they should define the process towards the Summit of the Future and the Digital Compact. And so until they give the mandate for us to convene meetings, we cannot. But then at the same time, our point is that because it has to be multi-stakeholder, you can't really wait for the member states to give the okay to have some kind of meeting and then have a fight over the modalities of how to have such a meeting, that it's really kind of a waste of time. So what we've been doing is really sort of going to existing processes and institutions like the IGF, for instance, the WSIS process, other multi-stakeholder forums, to say, this is the chance to provide inputs now and really make sure that there is that substantive technical knowledge as well as views on what needs to go into the compact, and let the work actually start moving forward in a bottom-up manner rather than wait for the official okay from the member states. And so, for instance, Nico, again, like Nico Hinrich, if this is something that the G77 could consider as a means of perhaps universalizing the messages that you will be coming up with through the G7 process and bringing it to multilateral fora like the UN, it would be, I think, a very powerful moment to say that digital processes around the world really are seeing what they could contribute to the digital compact that the UN will be putting forward. And like I said, really, it's not a case of us. We have to strike this sort of balance between waiting for member states, but at the same time, really seizing the own initiative, because it's not real, as you've just said, for the member states to decide and opine on it. We've actually talked to a lot of the stakeholders and the tech community and the private sector firms who really do think that the time is right for such an action, but then it needs the initiative for them to actually convene their own meetings, bring forward their inputs, and really push it to the UN to say, this is what we want, and really it's incumbent on governments who frankly are behind the curve in a lot of cases to really take notice of what's going on. And so I think that's part of the momentum that we're trying to build this year, and the energy around the compact day really will be bottom up through existing processes and leveraging on this energy that is being formed around these key issues.
Thanks so much, Yuping. Because we had a departure from our original plan, we have extra time today, so I'm allowing for more conversation and questions. So let me ask if there are any other questions or comments for Yuping before we move on to the next topic. Not hearing any. So thank you so much, Yuping. As always, we appreciate all of your hard work.
Sorry, Vint. if I could
Yes.
ask a question, I'm sorry, I
Of
just
course.
couldn't find the raise hand function. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for having the floor. Yuping, thank you for your presentation. You know, as a citizen of Canada, I guess my question maybe applies to everybody that's on this call. What can we do in our respective countries to help to you know, the work that you're doing, such that our member state in the country of Canada is actually motivated to try to draw or at least be part of the leadership of the efforts that you are suggesting needs to be undertaken?
Thanks, Bill. I think it's two things. I think one, in your existing alliances, for instance, through the supercluster, for instance, you can already, on behalf of your organizations, put forward ideas that the UN should take into account. So that could be a submission to the UN itself. We're thinking of creating some kind of public platform that will allow the collection of inputs from consortiums such as your own. But in terms of the government influence, I think as much as you can say that exactly like this, civil society, stakeholders, private sector have to be at the table and engaging as well as member states when it comes to multilateral fora, that we need to innovate in some ways. The way the UN does business, particularly around digital, is a message that the governments really need to get into their heads. Canada actually is more forward-leaning than the rest. So like whatever you can do to reinforce and keep that going, that would be great. I've actually had some conversations with Canada, which actually is chairing the Freedom Online Coalition this year. That's a grouping of 37 member states that are focused on the issue of internet freedom, internet openness, and digital human rights as well, to really say that this is, again, the opportunity for the Freedom Online Coalition, co-chaired by Canada this year, to really take forward these shared values and principles and try and universalize them at the UN through the compact process. So again, very happy to continue the discussion bilaterally together as well, but we strongly really would welcome your support and engagement as we move forward the digital compact.
Thank you. Anir Chowdhury has a question. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Vint. Yuping, thank you very much for that wonderful, energetic presentation. Really appreciate that. I represent the government of Bangladesh, and we have been doing a lot of digital work in Bangladesh, and we don't feel that we are behind the private sector. We're actually driving a lot of the digital adoption within society and also within private sector. Now, I wanted to just to get an understanding of this digital compact a bit better. In a sense, as Vint rightly pointed out, obviously private sector drives digital adoption, sometimes much more than government. In Bangladesh, the telco adoption was driven by private sector, but digital services adoption was driven by government. Now, I see similar efforts, let's say by World Economic Forum, which is very private sector led, and then by the UN, which is very sort of multilateral organization / government led. Now, and then there is disconnect. So how do you see the global compact that you're talking about, the digital compact? How do you see bridging that? That's one question. Another is if you would have specific focus areas, for instance, the Edison Alliance that was launched about a year ago in World Economic Forum has 3 focus areas and potentially a 4th that they're discussing, but really 3 focus areas. And I'm part of that. I'm one of the deputy champions in that alliance. And the way it's going, it's actually very focused, and we're getting a lot of work done because it focuses on health, education, and financial inclusion. So whether you're contemplating specific focus areas instead of saying it's broad digital adoption or digital society transformation, just wanted to get that. So bridging and focus areas. Thank you.
Thank you, Anira. You're right. I mean, this is part of the difficulty we face here at the UN, that the UN is primarily government-based. And so you're right that, and I think it's Vint also raises too, we're not that good with engaging with the private sector. So I think the hope is that with the compact comes this opportunity to precisely, as you said, bridge that difference. The World Economic Forum's model is really something that we should consider in terms of how we do business here at the UN, in terms of opening up the space. But in the same way, it is a bit of a hard push because it requires the member states to acknowledge that they're really not just the only players in this space, and that we really have to look to the tech giants and the private sector to be equal partner in a lot of these discussions. And that is not an easy sell here at the UN. And so I do think that like engagements such as that by Bangladesh, for instance, and how you've successfully sort of maneuvered this kind of, this type of relationship would be instrumental in shaping the way we approach the compact and the dialogue here at the United Nations. Bangladesh also, here at the UN in New York, has actually been a leader in championing the work of the least developed countries. So for instance, the least developed country summit was actually led by the Bangladesh delegation in terms of the negotiations. And so that's an area where we're also very interested in sort of focusing GUTS and Digital Compact. When we talk about the focus areas, which are mentioned in the Secretary General's report, such as connectivity, for instance, and digital human rights and capacity building, digital skills and so forth, can we have a particular focus on the needs of the global south, developing countries and developed countries? So when you talk about focus areas, for instance, you're right that ideally we should have some kind of priority themes, but the UN being the UN and sort of taking a slightly Christmas tree approach has really opened up the scope to say, we want shared principles for the overall internet and the digital future. And I agree with you that perhaps it would be good if we could focus more, but I think the idea is that because there's never been before this type of multi-stakeholder approach or even agreement document on these shared principles, it is okay to take a bit of a broader approach so that we can really underline what it means to have open, free, secure internet. But recognizing, as you said, the need to make some concrete progress, we think that these shared principles can then be matched with voluntary commitments that really do drill down more to concrete actions. So for instance, in the area of connectivity, where we have, for instance, the ITU and a big multi-stakeholder coalition talking about what it means to have universal, meaningful connectivity, can we then have also very concrete voluntary commitments on policy actions and areas where outcomes are needed versus just these principles itself? So you're right that we're going to have to find a way to strike a balance, and also bear in mind that ultimately it will be negotiated by diplomats here in New York that don't have such a good understanding of the impact of these digital issues while remaining at a sufficiently high level, because it's going to be a summit and leaders and so forth. So it's going to be with the inputs of real people who are working on these issues, like those gathered around the table, that we will be able to strike that appropriate balance of having uniting principles, but at the same time enough meat in those areas to actually make some progress going forward. And I think that we can do it because, like I said, this will be the first time that the UN is attempting this type of multi-stakeholder agreement compact. And so we're counting on that as setting the road forward. It's also not, the end, be all and end all. We also see it as the start of the process. So I will sort of mention candidly that there is thinking that in the compact, that could be the seeds that are planted for more concrete action in specific areas. In the area of data, for instance, there are parts of the UN that are considering what it means for data governance in the longer run. And there are suggestions that perhaps there could be a call for some kind of data convention or some kind of more some kind of framework in the longer run on the issue specifically of data. And that the compact is the way to land initial ideas and then see whether there can be follow-up in specific processes subsequently of that.
Thanks so much, Yuping. I know that there's a comment from Anir in the chat that you should pay attention to. Let's move on to the next topic, which is the DPGA update from Siddharth Shetty. So Siddharth, you're on.
Thank you so much, Wint, and thank you, Malin, for inviting me here. This is the first time I'm participating in this discussion, so really grateful to be joining all of you. I'm Siddharth Shetty, a volunteer with the iSpirit Foundation and also a board member at the Digital Public Good Alliance. I'll give you an introduction into both of these bodies and also sort of give you an overview of the type of digital public goods that are being built out both domestically at scale within India, and now some of it are being globalized as well. iSpirit is a non-profit technology think tank, primarily based out of Bangalore. You could think of us much like Linux or Wikipedia, but our volunteers are focused on building out digital public infrastructure, really in the areas of financial and health inclusion. That journey started off first by creating an identity system for 1 billion Indians with which they could digitally authenticate themselves. And second, it resulted in the creation of a mass market payment system called UPI, which I'll talk to you about in detail today, which really is a partnership between public infrastructure, because it's nothing but an open protocol, and then private innovation on top, where you have a range of Indian companies, American, Chinese, and beyond that, participating in a way that India continues to enforce sovereignty over that infrastructure. And today, as a result of UPI, we do 2.5 times more digital payments than China. And this was introduced just about 5 years back. And then the third element that we've been working on relates to data, the data empowerment and protection architecture. And that's essentially a techno-legal framework with which we can give individuals and businesses control over their data. This is rolling out again within India, but there is a forum that has been created along with Margaret Vestager from the European Union and political representatives from France, Japan, Norway, Australia, Rwanda, and a few other countries to now take this to other parts of the world as well. So that's a brief introduction into iSpirit. The Digital Public Good Alliance, iSpirit is one of the founding members behind DPGA, but really it was born through the work that was done by the United Nations Secretary General and the team that was put together, the high-level panel on digital cooperation. So in 2019, along with Sierra Leone, iSpirit, UNICEF, and NORAD, the government of Norway, the DPGA Alliance was put together. The DPG Alliance has since expanded to include UNDP and the GIZ as well. And its real agenda is to promote global adoption of digital public goods. It happens through two forms. One, it maintains a registry of digital public goods that are created. And there is now a standard on what it takes to be considered a digital public good. So there were about 600 nominees, and finally, I think around 60 types of tools, open source software and beyond have been listed as digital public goods. And the broad criteria is its alignment with the Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs, the usage of open source, the usage of open protocols, how it harnesses data. Does it result in exploitation or does it result in empowerment? And so the second element of it is creating a certification ecosystem so that people can become part of and list their tool or project as part of the DPG registry, and that's discoverable to various partners across the world. There's also active work, and Kate, who's on this call, will talk about it in the next session, on a broader charter behind digital public goods. And I think some of the discussion around shared values and principles will find resonance out there. But I'd like to talk to you about, that's sort of a broad overview, but I'd really like to dive deep into two digital public infrastructures and their journey fairly quickly. And that came out of a discussion Malin and I had just about a week back. One is UPI, the payments protocol, and second is DAPA. You could think of UPI as a 3-layer cake. So if we look back about 5 years, in a population of 1.3 billion Indians, only 30 million Indians had a credit card, right? So existing payment infrastructure, which were the card networks, were just not usable or scalable. No amount of education would have resulted in adoption of digital payments. And we know digital payments is important because it creates trust. It can be used to enter the formal financial system through those trust trails. But the transaction costs were extremely high. And so therefore, it resulted in us saying, given the socioeconomic status of India, where we have now, as things stand, 400 million Indians that have adopted 4G connectivity, 400 million with a smartphone, another 600 million that have a feature phone, we said, could we go back to first principles and redesign a payment system from scratch? And therefore not take an approach, one that essentially you're seeing what is coming out from the US, which is saying there's no innovation happening within the central bank or banking system. So let's disrupt that altogether and push cryptocurrencies and create a parallel system. But it was also different from the approach that China took of essentially creating two large wallet companies and then allowing all innovation to be created on top of that, which, as we see, they have recently reined in and brought in the banking system a bit by brute force. We took a call saying that we do need to co-opt the banking system. And so for reasons of monetary policy, for reasons of grievance redressal, the money flow should remain within bank accounts. But access to bank accounts is always a problem, and the banks are not going to innovate in that regard. And therefore, we unbundled that permission and gave that into third-party innovators, whether it was Google Pay, PhonePe, Paytm, and many other private companies, WhatsApp Pay, and hence Facebook, that are out there today. So therefore, you had public infrastructure at the base, which was this open protocol implemented in an interoperable manner that connects all the banks together. You then had the bank account, the regulated entities in the middle. And so the flow of money happened only within the banking system. But consumers interacted with third-party apps on top of their choice, and it's completely interoperable. So this is a 5-party system. And conventional wisdom was, for those of us in the internet world, we are aware of how multi-party systems outperform a single-party system. But this wasn't the case when we looked at payments 5 years back. And so there was also a lot of skepticism within India saying a one-party model is much more reliable intuitively than a multi-party model. But 5 years hence, that multi-party system where I could be on one application of my choice, the merchant could be altogether on a different application. Both of us could be banking with 2 different bank accounts, right? And then you have a switch in between. So you really have choice and competition throughout the ecosystem. Has resulted in India now doing about 4 billion transactions a month at next to low transaction costs. Because one of our other principles was, if you look at it in the internet world, the cost of moving a voice packet was free. So why should the cost of moving even smaller packets of data, which is a payment transaction, be 1 to 2%? And so that resulted this 3-layer cake, which is nothing but public infrastructure at the base, but you've opened it up to private innovation on top. And there are clear rules of the game when it comes to monopoly effects, etc. And for example, when a particular application captured, let's say, 60% of the market, India was able to enforce sovereignty, saying, no, for reasons of competition, it should be 30%, and hence keep it a competitive market, which are very difficult to do in the rest of the internet. Is one example of a digital public good that has been implemented in this ecosystem and now is being taken to other parts of the world. And its artifact is nothing but an open protocol that different stakeholders went ahead and adopted at different parts of the chain. The second piece that I'd like to talk to you about, the second digital public good, is around data. So as people, of course, were transacting, digital data trails were being generated, connectivity was permeating, a key question was, how do we ensure that data is used for socioeconomically more valuable purposes beyond just ads, right? And therefore that meant if it needed to be used for financial services, if it needed to be used for health services, let's say remote teleconsultation, you really needed a framework with which people had control over their data. And how does control get manifested? So we thought of that in 3 layers, again, technologically, legally, and institutionally. So within EU, a lot of the principles would be resonant because the principles of GDPR are also about giving control, but it's primarily a regulatory driven approach, which is why we've seen certain market failures take place. So what we did is we supplemented the regulatory layer with a set of open technology standards and introduced a new party into the ecosystem, which are called consent managers. That is the institutional innovation that was created. And so the way that works is essentially your data can reside with a bank, with a hospital, with any custodian, and data remains decentralized. Identity in this ecosystem remains federated. In fact, by design, some of our volunteers have designed Aadhaar, which is one of the largest unique ID systems in the world, but we don't use Aadhaar anywhere in this architecture for reasons of privacy. Our view is the individual should have the ability to create a unified view of their data, but no one else in the system should have unique access to it. And so therefore, an individual can go to a consent manager. We unbundle consent both from the custodian of your data, because otherwise you're running around to different custodians. And we unbundled it from the consumer of data. I'm dialing in from France, where every time I do a search, I have to keep clicking I agree, or the pop-up, which is a consent to collect, which we know is fundamentally broken. So we said it doesn't make sense for consumers of data to be collecting consent, because there you have misaligned incentives taking place. And so this new entity was created in the middle, which is a consent manager, and it has a fiduciary responsibility for managing your consent in an informed way. It doesn't store your data. It's legally prohibited from storing your data. And there are many such entities that exist. So, you don't have one central place that every individual is supposed to go to. And the flow is simple. You can register with the consent manager of your choice, discover where your data resides, link it. You will get an ID, let's say, mail in at the rate of consent manager 1. And now when you go to a data consumer, you can give them your ID, and in real time, that data consumer will send you a consent request. And that consent request can, of course, be customized by consent managers because what may be informed to you may not be informed to me, right? And so you can truly operationalize the principles of GDPR and some of the privacy regulations, California, that many other countries have put out, Australia, the consumer data right, through these tools. And so this is now rolling out within the Indian ecosystem. Your data flows in an end-to-end encrypted manner with perfect forward secrecy. And now there's an active effort to harmonize this. As I mentioned, a group along with Margaret Vestager, Henri Vaudier from France, and then other political representatives from 5-6 countries that are looking at how do we extend this techno-legal approach. Because really what it's doing is and just to wrap up, it's taking an approach where, of course, the individual's in the center, but you're kind of drawing at the intersection of privacy, competition, innovation. And so that means, and what we're seeing even on the ground is when individuals are in control of their data, you have far more innovations that are possible on the data consumer end. It creates a far more level playing field on the data consumers end as well, in terms of the types of products that can be created. And so we've really looked at it in matters of regulated data. We have not really looked at it in matters of private data, although it's a protocol that people are free to adopt. But that's an overview on 2 digital public goods that have been architected as part of this effort with an iSpirit. And of course, some of these digital public goods are also part of the DPG Alliance's registry. So I'll pause here and happy. I see many.
I'm going to jump in. The reason is Sid is exciting a lot of comments in chat, and we want to take all of these, and we'll have Sid Shetty part 2 next month on March 21st. So back to you, Vint.
Well, thanks very much. I actually have a bunch of questions too. And we're struggling a little bit because we're a bit past time. How would you
Your
propose
questions prioritize, Vint. We want your questions.
Well, let me just get one clarification from Sid. First of all, we've got consent managers, users, holders of data, and parties that wish to get access to the data. So the thing I would like to understand is that the user registers with a consent manager, gets an ID. Someone who wants data about that user or from that user sends a consent request to the user, not to the consent manager, but to the user. Is that correct?
Yeah, so I'm just flashing a diagram so that might clarify it. The user has a relationship with the consent manager. So when I give the data consumer my ID, say Vint at the rate of consent manager 1, it gets resolved much like a DNS lookup. And then that is sent to its respective user's consent manager, and the consent manager would show notice. You'd imagine get a notification saying, hey, this data user is asking for your data for this purpose, time period, etc. That is the relationship between the user and the consent manager.
Okay, thank you. That diagram is super helpful. I think what we'll have to do is collect the other questions and deliver them to you, and perhaps schedule another session for where you can give answers to a lot of those questions, if that works for you, Malin.
Yes, we are scheduling him for next month.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. So thank you, Sid. That's an amazing accomplishment now that we see the scope of what you've been able to do. So thank you for sharing all of that. The next topic is equals, which we haven't heard from for a while. And that comes from Alex Wong and Carla Luciardello. So I don't know which of the two will begin, but equals is an important activity that Malin has been much involved with. So let's find out where we stand with that.
Hi, Lou, Vint, and Maylin, and everyone. I'm on a very unstable connection because we actually had an old-fashioned power outage here in Geneva. So I'm on mobile and it's not very strong. So I'll keep it very brief. First of all, Doreen sends her regards and apologies. She's got an unmovable commitment with one of the regional telecommunication organizations and couldn't miss that. So we thought it'd be appropriate indeed, Vint, to give maybe an update, since we have many new colleagues on one of our big flagship programs at ITU that we were doing in partnership with many other organizations on Equals, which is closing the gender digital divide. And Carla, who some of you might know, but if you don't, you'll know her after this call. She's our highly energetic and very capable program manager on.
Great, thank you much, Alex, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone. Indeed, since it is my first time to intervene, a pleasure to be with you here, and a big thanks to Maylin really for the opportunity. My name is Carla Licciardello, and I'm the Senior Digital Inclusion Coordinator at the ITU, and I'm one of the, let's say, initial co-founders of Equals. So I don't know, Maylin, if we can put the slides on, or do you want me to share my slides?
Yes, you please share your slides.
Yeah, perfect. Okay, so give me a minute. Okay, great. So I think, okay, so I think, so very quickly. So for those of you, of course, that don't know, we have been working on, let's say, on Equals since quite a long time, since 2016. The idea of the global partnership is to be a real solution, for achieving gender digital divide by 2030. And the idea, of course, is to have, to put together really global partnerships. Let me take this off. Yeah, global partnerships together with international organizations, industry, government, civil society, and research institutions to mobilize a movement for change. And of course, to integrate solutions at scale. Of course, we all know why closing the gender digital divide is very much important. So since we are running a little bit late with time, I will skip that part. But anyway, so Equals is counting on more than 100 partners as of today. As we said, these are partners from different, different stakeholders, from the private sector to government to industry leaders and to international organizations, and so of course the civil society. And the overall idea is to really close the gender digital divide by looking at it from four main perspectives. One is to improving access. So one coalition is focusing on access, with the goal to reduce the gender gap in internet access by the 50% by 2030. The second component is looking at skills, with the goal of ensuring the 60% of women and girls that the 60% of women and girls have achieved at least a minimum level of proficiency in sustainable digital skills by 2025. And the third component, which is looking at promoting leadership in tech, with the main goal of having the 30% of tech leaders as women by 2030. All these three main groups are backed up by what we are calling the Research Coalition. The Research Coalition has the goal to get the members, which are more than 30 universities from all over the world, to develop research and to develop information in order to have and to provide evidence-based for possible decision making. The network, as we said, is a global network, is very much multi-stakeholder, and here we can see Maylin, who has been always one of our active supporter of the partnership, so a big thanks. And the way that we are governed, let's say, is by the steering committee. So the steering committee is composed by one representative of the co-founders. The co-founders of the partnership is ITU, UN Women, the International Trade Center, the United Nations University, and GSMA. We also have the coalition leaders, which are also part of the steering committee. At the moment, we have Oslomet, Georgia Tech, ITC and UN Women, and DQ Institute. And then, of course, we have the partners that are contributing financially to sustain EQUAS. And in this case, we have GIZ, who is the vice chair, and of course, the Internet Society. The steering committee is really providing guidance, so it's a little bit the board of the overall partnership, and is really trying to address issues related to the partnership. With that, I think that I can go a little bit very quick into the slides, more than again deeping down into the different work of the coalitions. So the Access Coalition, who is currently led by SOA and Digital Opportunity Trust, has the goal are really working together with the partners to making a more affordable access and use on internet for women, making all citizens aware and comfortable with the benefits of women and girls going online, improving the accessibility issues, improving safety and security and harassment concerns, developing relevant content, and providing women and girls with the confidence and know-how to get online. When it comes to the Skills Coalition, we really want to ensure that, again, girls can access, women and girls can access high quality ICT education trainings, and that they can get really equipped with the minimum level of proficiency in ICT skills to, of course, become and to use efficiently the digital, the internet. And the third coalition, which is looking at leadership, it is really trying to change a little bit the mindset of men and women about the role of women in ICT and businesses. It's also ensuring that tech companies implement internal policies to employ and promote women. And that goes, of course, with the ensuring the work-life balance and work safety and security in the workplace. It is also looking at ensuring that women ICT entrepreneurs receive the support that they need to success. And it is really to ensure that women entrepreneurs and business owners across all the sector can use ICTs to improve their competitiveness. The Skills Coalition, the Research Coalition, as we said, has really the aim to identify and fill key knowledge and evidence gap by providing really research, and by really from that research developing actionable guidelines and recommendations that can be taken into consideration, of course, by policymakers. Some of the programs that we have, so the way how we work is that, of course, based on the different partners and what the partners can put together, we have programs that are more looking at educational programs and training programs, such as the Hair Digital Skills, which is actually one of our commitment towards generational equality. The Hair Digital Skills Initiative is composed by three main, let's say, components. One is the workshops, really hands-on workshop with the young girls, the badges, which is a training curricula, and of course the mentoring opportunities. And of course, we will be more than happy to provide additional information, if needed later on. We also have the Tech for Girls workshops. So these are workshops that are specifically looking at e-commerce and mobile app development. It's something that we have started to do with GSMA, and we are continuing to do it, and of course to expand in different countries. And finally, one of our biggest, I would say, projects that we have where EQUAS is actually actively involved is the project that we have with the Enhanced Integrated Framework, which is looking at creating equal economic opportunities in three main LDCs countries, Burundi, Ethiopia, and Haiti. And we really hope to report back, to have the opportunity to report back on the results in the next, in next meetings when possible. So with that, I will stop. Thank you very much again, and back to you, Wim. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was a very comprehensive summary, and I'm glad to see that the Equals program is alive and well and healthy and proceeding. something that we desperately need to accomplish, which is bringing women online in a safe and secure way. Malin, I noticed that I had failed to put the KZOM on before the equals report, so I'll do that next.
No, it's all right. KZOM surrendered her time to Sid Shetty, seeing the great amount of interest, and KZOM will speak next month.
I see. Okay, so we'll just wait for that in March. In that case, and since Yu Yong is unavailable, Matt
So we've
Gamser be the next.
That's right.
Would be the next speaker on SME financing. But before we go to Matt, let me just find out if there are any questions for Carla or Alex. This is the part where people who have questions try to figure out how to turn off or turn on the microphone. So I think I'm not hearing any. So Matt, you're up next on SME financing. So which is very important because we know that SMEs succeed only if they have adequate financial support. So what can you tell us about that?
Thank you, Vin. And I would also say that SMEs, it's becoming increasingly clear, if it wasn't before COVID, that SMEs, if they're not digitally enabled, are going to be left out. But by contrast, the SMEs, the more that we are digitally enabling both SMEs and their financiers, the more we are seeing opportunity, whereas before we only saw problems. So hi, everybody. I'm Matt Gamser. I work at the International Finance Corporation, the private sector arm of the World Bank, where I run something called the SME Finance Forum. It is a creation of the G20 countries. It exists to help support shared learning, networking, and public-private dialogue in the field of SME finance. And I was going to spend a few minutes today. Malin asked me to talk a bit about what's going on in SME financing at a global level. So I thought I'd say a bit about the G20's program in this area. I'll say a bit about APEC, which is not the whole world, but I think the 24 APEC countries in the Asia Pacific Economic Coordination Group probably represent about 80+% of the world's GDP nowadays. So pretty important to know what APEC is doing. And then if there's any time, I'll say just a couple things about in our own little network of 250 or so institutions, banks, fintechs, development banks that make up the industry part of the SME Finance Forum's work, what we're doing. So let me share my screen, and I hope that will take you to the only slide I'm going to use to talk about the G20's work. And there's a lot on this slide. This is not my slide, it's the government of Indonesia's slide. They're the president of the G20 right now. And in the area of SME and SME financing, it's Bank Indonesia and the Ministry of Finance that lead that work. I should say that SMEs are, and SME digital financial inclusion is one of the two central priorities, multi-year priorities of the G20 right now. And the other one is digitalization. So with respect to this group, the G20 hears you loud and clear, and certainly in the financial inclusion space, it's making the digital element front and center. And you see that there are four central things that the Indonesians are pushing forward during this presidency, one of which is going to take longer than their presidency. But one is on digital financial inclusion in general, with a particular focus on women and youth and other disadvantaged peoples. And there's a lot of jargon here. They're going to work on more practical advice. There's something the G20 did a few years ago, supporting high-level principles. This was during the Chinese presidency, for how countries could advance digital financial inclusion. So there's continued work on turning that into practical advice for countries. What are some things that really can be done? And as I said, with a special emphasis on women, young people, on other disadvantaged groups, on migrants is another big focus. The other deliverables focus a bit more about SMEs. One is we are having a workshop on the 2nd of March with the Indonesian presidency on how digital innovation is helping go beyond just credit to help SMEs recover from COVID and to be more accessible for digital financial inclusion. That's an open workshop for everyone. It starts at 06:30 Eastern Standard Time. Sorry about that, people in the Western Hemisphere, but as you may know, Indonesia's GMT +7. So they didn't want to go too late, but it's going to be a very interesting affair that's going to highlight some good cases, and it's going to launch a new database on successful cases in this area, which will be open for everybody to submit useful examples, which hopefully can inspire governments and can inspire industry to do more in this area. And that database will be fleshing out and doing it and taking in more and more cases over the course of this year in the Indonesian presidency. And there'll probably be a second event later in the year to talk about what's there and to further encourage more people, because it will be a living database. It's not going to shut down at the end. And then there's another piece of work that's very important is on data, because the data on MSME financing is quite bad, I should say, globally. That's a very technical term. It means that we don't know what's going on. We don't know what's going on at a country level. And when we in development banks work with financial institutions, we know only a very limited amount about what they're doing on an institution level. And we different development finance institutions don't ask for the same things in the same way at the same time. And we don't harmonize with the local regulators. So we create a real administrative mess for our clients. So the G20 wants to try to do something about that. It's not, obviously digital will be a critical element here, because if you can't do this digitally, it's going to be administratively impossible. So that's going to be an interesting area. And then the final area, which should be of interest, is there's trying to develop a toolkit so countries can see how ready they are, how good their environments are for promoting digital financial inclusion. And this is a very interesting exercise being led by a group called the Alliance for Financial Inclusion. It's a consortium of emerging market regulators, mostly central bankers, but other types of regulators of the financial sector. And so there are going to be some very interesting things happening in the G20. And let me just flip to another page, because I'm going to quickly turn to APEC. I know I'm going really fast, and I'm happy to answer questions offline or later. APEC is working in a number of relevant areas. This one, through the Sustainable Finance Development Group, is trying to do something that we started a discussion on last October at the Global SME Finance Forum, our annual meeting, where we started trying to focus on how to look at green financing more at an SME scale. And this is something that APEC is very keen on. So they're going to be holding a workshop in June on what can we do to help MSMEs transition to more sustainable ways of doing business. Most of the green finance talk, as I don't think I have to explain to people, is geared toward larger ticket deals. And it's not a matter of just dividing it by 100 or 1,000 and that'll work for SMEs. It's a whole different challenge, not in the least aided by the fact that there's massive capacity issues, both in the financial sector and in the SME sector, of course, about understanding green issues and possibilities. And unlike bigger companies, which have specialist staff and can hire specialist consultants because they can afford it. So that's one area APEC is working on. Another area is in the general infrastructure of the financial market, something I know that's close to Mei Lin's heart. And there are different areas that APEC has been working on for some longer than others. They've been working on credit information and secured transactions infrastructure for quite a long time now, working on improving digital shared infrastructure that can help in both these areas. Now they're working on, I think, inspired by looking at work that's done by people like Mei Lin and others on how we can broaden that to the whole data ecosystem and data sharing and common digital data infrastructure. And then a final area is on supply chain and market digital infrastructure and how this can be developed. And there are going to be a number of events, as you can see on the slide. And there's going to be one that I want to particularly highlight. this is my final slide, on interoperable open data systems. They had an event on February 14th. This is a topic that I think they're going to be taking up again later this quarter. Thailand happens to be the head of APEC this year. And I know that they really want to work on how do you create more equitable, more open and fair systems, which balance the potential of all this digital data with the respect for privacy and intellectual property and other rights. So that's the slides I wanted to share. Just on the SME Finance Forum's side, we focus this year on 4 priority areas on risk management and data, which is obviously consistent with what you just heard about in the APEC work. We're going to be focusing on supply chains, also what you heard about in data. We're going to be focusing on the digitalization in general of financial institutions and of their SME customers. And then we're going to focus on partnership with fintechs, and all these with 2 cross-cutting themes of climate and greening finance down to the SME level. And the final one, which we call inclusion, is making sure that traditionally hard to serve groups, that's women, youth, startups, rural enterprises, and the like, are able to be served better. So, so that's all. I know I went through a whole lot very fast, but hopefully if you have any questions, you can follow up with me, and I'll put my contact information in the chat.
Actually, thank you, Matthew. There's a question from Siddharth, which I think is worthy of response, if you can see in the chat. He's asking about the Bank of International Settlements and wondered whether they have any relationship to the work that you're doing.
So yes, the short answer is yes, yes, and yes. There's a long-standing, a 10+ year relationship now between the Global Partnership for Financial Inclusion of the G20 and the BIS. There's a biennial meeting, which took place late last year, the last one. So that means once every 2 years, just so I'm being clear. We also in the SME Finance Forum have a relationship with BIS. They're often using us as a way of consulting with a broader and more diverse group of finance industry people about what they're working on. We recently helped contribute people to a workshop on cross-border remittances. I think that was last December. So that's a very short answer. There's lots more potential to work with them and all the standard setting bodies. The good news is that the standard setting bodies are, compared to 10 years ago, they see working on these inclusion and digitalization issues as core. Whereas I think 10 years ago, they didn't see why they should be thinking about that. So there's been huge progress, a lot more to do, but yeah.
We still have some time.
And same
Matt.
with IMF, since there's a question about IMF. IMF, I would say exactly the same applies. 10 years ago, they didn't want to know. They are really working hard on financial inclusion issues now. They think that's core. And I think the G20, I mean, look, I'm not a G20 country, so this is not a patting myself on the back, but I think the G20 made a very wise decision when they were formed after the financial crisis, when they decided that they didn't just need to work on stability, that inclusion had to be one of their key objectives. And I think that's one of the reasons that important institutions like the standard setting bodies and the IMF and the World Bank and others have upped their effort in the area of inclusion. Thanks.
Matt, there's a question from Bob Spohr earlier in the chat having to do with extending the framework to other kinds of fee relief. Can you see that question in the chat? You'll have to scroll upward.
Yes, I'm looking at it now.
Maybe we could have.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And again, simple, short answer, yes, that's a great area for more exploration. And you can see some examples in, there's already some small examples, and in China with things like Anttree, big examples of how you can combine digital technology with helping move multiple agendas in the right direction. or Ant
Okay.
Forest, some people know it as.
Thanks so much, Matt. Now that we know how to find you based on the chat information, others can ask questions as follow-up. So I think now it's Mei Lin's turn to bring us up to speed on the G7 DCD submissions. So I'll turn this over to Mei Lin.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Matt, for a terrific overview, much more concise than I expected. Lots of things to follow up on. I'm about to share my screen and then go into SlideShare. Slideshow, play from the start. Okay, does everybody see it? Hello?
Looks good.
Okay, good. So while I'm the convener of our network and I am chair of the People-Centered Network, this is one place that sort of both the people-centered internet community as well as the DCD community came together. And this has been a meeting in which we've had more mention of the G7 and G20 than we've ever had. So I thought I'd actually give you a view of how organizations, networks like ours can participate and invite more participation in specific sort of policy briefings for the G7 and G20. How I discovered what happens in the G20 is because I co-wrote this paper with Christoph Meinl, the CEO of the Hasso-Plattner Institute. They are the #1 computer science department in Europe. And they essentially put forward the paper, and I suggested the policy recommendations that we could make, which are at the bottom of the abstract, that we should have common standards and have a global clean IT label, and that the G20 countries could increase funding for research activities in the energy consumption of IT, and that we have to be sustainable by design. Otherwise, we create ourselves a plastics problem, where plastic was a great new thing 40 years ago, and now we have these terrible plastic islands in the Pacific, and much went wrong with the enthusiasm for plastic. We don't want the same thing to happen with technology. So this paper led me into the process of participating in Think7, which is the policy discussion group that goes in parallel with the whole German G7 presidency. So what happened was that I came in with Hasso-Plattner Institute, Dr. Professor Christoph Meinl with the Clean IT paper. But as I listened to the discussions, I identified opportunity for digital cooperation and diplomacy-oriented topics. I also proposed participation from several of our DCD network members. And here's what happened. The G7 Think7 task forces were organized slightly differently from what Henrik Tholken spoke about the G7. So Think7 is looking at 5 different areas: sustainable planet, economic stability and transformation, healthy lives, investment in a better future, and stronger together. And these 5 areas, 200 to 300 people were part of being part of the task forces in each area. As I listened to it, however, the opportunity for DCD topics to be raised became so strong that this became a huge opportunity to see what our DCD network could do at short notice coming together. And so, in fact, over the last 3 weeks, we have proposed the following abstracts. The Clean IT one, which started last year, that of course is there as our #1. we continue, so I've left my name out of all of these because I'm in all of them, which keeps me busy. And we've got Tamara Singh and Benedict Signa looking at the concept of digital data utilities for stewarding MSME financing, micro, small, and medium enterprises. And you all will have copies of these slides, and you can click on any of them to actually see the abstract. And then I worked with the IEEE folks, Konstantinos Karachalios, the managing director of the Standards Organization, Michael Lucan, who's the president of the Member Geographic Activities, Alpesh Shah, the senior director for strategy for IEEE, John Havens, who has been leading the IEEE ethics work, with the recommendation that the G7 engage with a broad bottoms-up grassroots organization like the IEEE. So that was the third abstract. And there's more. We proposed to the Economics Task Force another version of the idea of a global public utility for financing SMEs. And we were delighted to have Eileen Murray, the chairman of FINRA, to propose that with us. FINRA is the new name of the organization that used to be called NASD, and NASDAQ, the stock exchange, was actually created as a for-profit spin-off out of FINRA. So to have Eileen Murray proposing this is a very significant recommendation. And so Nico, we hope to actually work closely with you to bring this into the digital discussions for the G7 as well. We've had a lot of discussion both at the Indonesian and G7, Indonesian G20 and G7 level for harmonization. And there is a need for harmonization, especially in the area of digital economics, because everybody says you've got to measure it, but how we're measuring it is different all over the place, especially when you come to digital. So the idea of setting up a G7 Institute for Digital Economics is being proposed with Sean Flynn, who is the active author of the leading economics textbook in the world. The Healthy Lives Task Force, these are now submitted policies. They've gone through the abstracts, they were selected. And so if you click on these, Doreen from the ITU, Sarah Fisher from GIZ, Kate Wilson from DIAL, and a whole bunch of contributors. Just 2 days ago, we submitted a 2-page policy brief, really encompassing so much of what we've spoken about at DCD and the GovStack Digital Building Blocks initiatives. The seventh one was digital utilities, taking the digital utility idea that we proposed earlier for MSME financing. It's become really clear that scientific research needs a way for data to be viewed together by the people who generated that data. The idea of data cooperatives, about how people who have been contributing to scientific research have really not had engagement or governance in the use of their own data. So that's another submission that we've made. And finally, the last three, one of the proposals in the G7 German presidency was to set up climate clubs for the G7. But we wanted to take that further and set up community climate clubs, and so that people can actually visualize their personal progress and contribution to an equitable world. And I was delighted to have the Chief Scientific Advisor to the UK Home Office, John Aston, participate in this, together with Professor Jesus Crespo from Austria, who's a director in the Wittgenstein Institute. Partner to Connect is one that the DCD group has been very active in. Alex Wong has presented several times. So we put that forward together with Minerva Novero from the UNDP, and with a nod from Miguel Gamino Jr., who has presented here from MasterCard. How can we partner to connect for progress to an equitable world? And the last one is with Ilan Shabay, who has been active in this forum. How do you build resilient networks with community living learning labs? And we hope that this can take forward the green, the Green New Deal work that he's been doing with the EU. And Mozelle Thompson, a former FTC commissioner in the United States, believes that this actually is an opportunity for a digital consumer association where local groups can actually help to validate the effectiveness and also potential harms, not validate the harms, but identify the harms that digital can bring into communities. I am going through that quite quickly so that you know and are aware that we as a group can come together on items like this and make a difference globally. The timing for this Think 7 is shown here. And the timing is leading to where these policies can be considered for inclusion by the G7 at the June meeting. And this has really led me to think about what is digital cooperation diplomacy? What are we as a network? And as Vint completes his 2-year chairmanship, I want to put forward some terms of reference for your consideration, the group that's here with us now. Think of this as provisional, and we will come out to you with likely a poll, a survey to understand from you how we can make digital cooperation and diplomacy more valuable in the 2 years ahead under the chairmanship of our next chairman, who Vint will announce. But just to say something about this, we are a network of people coming together as individuals rather than as corporate representatives who are seeing the value of working together, sometimes moving faster than our institutes can do, but actually paving the way forward by working together. But we, in these monthly sessions, we learn about the innovative approaches, but we do more than learn, we apply our knowledge in real world settings. So we're a trading post to share and learn together in pragmatic action, actually building both on experience and failures so that we can architect resilience. And this word resilience is coming up more and more as we look at the risks and we are facing with COVID, with climate, with credit. We have to learn from our failures and actually not be embarrassed about them, but really share them so that we can devise new ways around them. And our whole goal here with digital cooperation diplomacy is so that people can flourish in an inclusive and sustainable way for stewarding our planet. So with that, I'm closing out my intervention, and back to you, Vint.
Well, that was rapid, efficient, and startling. I hadn't fully appreciated the scope of everything that you've been doing over the past, this last year, I guess. That's an amazing collection of contributions, all, especially when you see them all lumped together. You must be ready for a vacation. But did I understand correctly that you're in Basel right now in preparation for the meetings on the 28th?
Actually, so I'm in Basel because I'm actually very active, as you see above me, in the Arab Science Summit, which is being held in conjunction with the EU and AU Summit, African Union and European Union Summit. So it just seemed useful to be in the time zone of the meeting rather than waking up at 1 a.m. every morning. And then next week, I'm actually at Lake Como with World Data Labs, where Endemo Bitange and I are advisors to World Data Labs, which is a visualization activity, a spin-off from the World Bank, trying to make these indicators more clear for ordinary people about what we're trying to do together.
The implication is that you've gone back to traveling again, which is something that many of us have ceased doing for the past 2 years. How has that gone? Are you, you're feeling safe, and is it complicated? Do you end up having to, stay in a hotel for 2 weeks if you test positive for something?
Well, it is complicated. I have to say, I bought a fully refundable fare because I really didn't know if I would complete all of the paperwork and get the negative COVID test that I needed in order to travel. And I honestly didn't know I was going to be here or not, but I am here. It's taken something out of me, and I have to thank Casey Komlowski for, I could not have done the paperwork without her. But it's not easy. It's quite nerve-wracking. But luckily, because the paperwork is so onerous, by the time you get here, they wave you through because you've gone through a gauntlet before you've even gotten the plane.
Well, I guess that's encouraging, although I have to confess I've rather enjoyed not traveling too much. But I now miss the opportunity to be in the same time zone with people to avoid exactly the problem you described, which is being up at 1:30 in the morning. One of the problems with the internet is that even if it collapses distance, it doesn't do anything about time zones. We're working on that, but we haven't quite got it to function properly. In order to make it work, we need wormholes, and they're hard to find. So to be continued. Well, we actually have more time than I need to close out today's session. So I will first say thank you to Mei Lin for inviting me to participate in this way. I have definitely gained a great deal by the interactions that we've had over the past year or two, to say nothing of the excitement of watching people come together and accomplish useful things that they wouldn't otherwise have done were it not for this particular DCD meeting. So with some regret, I'm going to be handing my responsibilities over to a new chairman, whom I would like to introduce now. Her name is Neelie Jusk, and Neelie is the ambassador at large for digital affairs at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Estonia, which is responsible for the development and coordination of Estonia's digital diplomacy. And I have to emphasize that Estonia has been at the forefront of digitalization for some time now. A good friend of mine, Tuomas Ilves, is the former president and was really an icon in this space. Not only looking at the advantages and utilities of digitalization, but also on the problem of defense against harmful attack. So Estonia deserves enormous credit, and Neelie will certainly, or Nellie will certainly serve you well in this role because of her background and interests. She's a promoter of open, fair, and inclusive digital societies. She's a member of the World Economic Forum's Future Council on Agile Governance. She's an advisory board member of GovStack. She's a member of the support group of an Open Government Partnership Initiative and several networks of women in tech. So she will be certainly among those who will promote the Equals effort, which has already made so much progress. Apart from that, she has experienced life in the private sector in international and intergovernmental organizations like UNDP, the UNU, OECD, and in academia. She has a PhD in political and social sciences from the European University Institute in Italy, being fascinated by the impact that digital technologies have on our lives and on our societies. Over the past 20 years, She's advised political and public sector leaders in digital governance and digital economy in more than 40 countries in Central and Eastern Europe, Southeastern Europe, Middle East, Central Asia, and Africa. She's led the development and execution of government digitalization strategies and initiatives, but also has hands-on experience in the development of digital services and e-participation tools. Finally, she's a former Fulbright Schuman grantee at the National Center for Digital Government at the University of Massachusetts Amherst and at the Governance Lab at the New York University in the US. And so with that preamble, I would like to present to you Nelly Lusk, your new chairman. Nelly, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. It is, of course, my great honor to take after the person who would not need that long introduction to to anybody. And thank you, Mei-Lin, also for this invitation. And of course, I am very much looking forward to working with you. As Vint very, I would say, nicely said about Estonia, of course, Estonia, more than any country probably in the world, has benefited from digital technologies, and these tools have really made us much bigger than we are, and of course I'm very much proud of that. But we have to also understand, and being in Estonia, especially at these moments of time, we can see that that moving away from or further from where we are now is not possible with the same way than it was before. And partnerships and collaboration are needed more than ever. And I completely concur with Mei-Lin that we have to look at what we are doing, learn from each other, and do it together. So I am very much looking forward. Of course, some of the topics that were mentioned here today that concerns openness and open source have been also there to the digitalization and sort of the philosophy behind what we have done. And I'm looking forward very much for a stronger agenda in building and spreading the open digital society and open source based solution. So I guess it also resonates a little bit with this learning from each other more than perhaps some other ways to digitalize. But of course, above all, I am sure that I will also have fun with this group, because it always seems to me that all the things that you are doing are much more fun and useful than the things that I am doing here in my office. So with this, of course, we will discuss our future plans and what we can do together. But thank you once again for taking over, for this possibility to take over the chairing of the network and our meeting for some time. So I'm very grateful for that. So all the best from gray and and windy Tallinn.
So we share a common problem, Nelly. It's cold here in Washington, D.C. We even had a little bit of snow a couple of days ago. So welcome to this new post. We thank you so much for your willingness to volunteer to manage this group going forward. So I'm sure that you will do as better job than I did, just given your startlingly rich and I would say a varied background, to say nothing of being in a country where digitalization has been such an important part of its evolution. A couple of things that I think we might want to ponder, though. You brought up open source, and this has come up more than once in our discussions today. I would like to wave a kind of a pink flag here and say that open source is a two-edged sword. And the problem with open source often is that it does not get adequate curation. And that means that it often has serious bugs in it which do not get discovered. And the reason it doesn't get discovered, and sometimes as everyone assumes everyone else has already found all the bugs, so no one bothers to look. And the most recent logging bug, which I'm sure everyone on this call I hope knows about, has been around for quite a long time, and the software is very widely used, and it has created a huge challenge to find and fix all of the pieces of software that relied on that logging library. So I would like to urge you and others who are enthusiastic about open source to urge much more curation of the safety and security of the open source software. This is something I have been pushing very hard here at Google as well, because we are both promoters of and users of open source, and we have ample resources for analyzing the security of software that we would prepare and release into operation. But not all of the open source software has nearly the support that it needs. So I would say that in addition to all the other things that Mei-Lin and the rest of you have been talking about, if we're going to rely on open source, then we need to engage broadly on improving its safety and security. Mei-Lin, we have a few minutes left. I don't really, you said that you wanted me to say more about the development of the original internet, but I think everyone here is pretty familiar with that, and I see that Dorothy has her hand up, so why don't we see what Dorothy has to say?
Okay. Go ahead, Dorothy.
Thank you, Vince. You do keep reiterating this point about open source software, but we see huge amounts of bugs in proprietary software that people have paid huge amounts of money for. And every little software programmer's favorite is to actually get some money by fixing some of the bugs in proprietary software. So I think overall, whatever software that we're using, we have to acknowledge that there may be bugs. We keep looking and we will discover, but I think that with the open source community and people like you who are behind open source and the use of open source, we will see the kind of engagement that we need from the community to make sure that we don't have those bugs. But I am not seeing that this is an issue exclusive to open source technologies. I see that in all of our software, some of the most widely used softwares, we have serious bugs. And this is why I am against monopoly type situations where you see the whole world being dependent on particular softwares to do certain things. And then when you have a bug, you see everything crashes. And we've seen that in the last few months with some of the largest tech companies. So I just wanted to make that point. Bugs
so Dorothy,
everywhere.
Dorothy, we don't disagree. The reason the reason I keep emphasizing this is that too many people make the assumption that open source is somehow more secure because it's open, and I think both would agree that that's not the case. I have Amir and Yosef. Amir, why don't we take your comment first?
Thank you, Vint. On the issue of open source versus proprietary, I'd like to make a comment. What I have seen in general is that for developing countries, open source managed well can actually allow some leapfrogging. And we've seen that in Bangladesh. We're actually working with a few countries right now with technology that we're trying to open source from Bangladesh. The issue that I see is support around the software. Mm-hmm. And perhaps one could argue that proprietary, because there is business behind it, is supported better because when you need it, you can actually buy the support. Whereas in open source, where are you going to buy the support from? I mean, there's obviously an organization behind it. I mean, in some cases, obviously, there is Red Hat type of organizations which can provide some support internationally or even locally. So I think it's an issue of support for the software when we're actually doing integration around that. Obviously, no open source software just comes out of the box. We're not talking about word processing or email type of software. We're really talking about digital transformation software. There is a lot of system integration type of work that needs to happen. And when you're trying to do that system integration, open source often poses a challenge, whereas with proprietary software, you get that kind of support locally or internationally. So when we started working with DPGA, we faced that challenge as well. So that I think that I support Dorothy's position that open source may provide a solution to developing countries' technology needs because they can't buy expensive proprietary software. But I think we have to develop the right system integration ecosystems around the open source components. And DPGA, Dial, I think Kate is here, or maybe she was here. I think needs to provide or actually talk about that kind of system integration and technology management support going forward. So I think that's those are important things that we need to talk about at some point. But I do support open source as in general, in principle. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Anir. Yusuf, you have the floor.
Yeah, thank you. I will speak about open, but not open source. It's open science. I'm sorry, this is my first time to this meeting, so if my intervention is not suitable with the scope of the work or the work of this community, so I apologize in advance. I'm just introducing the concept of open science, which is another concept is proposed and supported by the United Nations. It's UNESCO is behind that to promote the open science to the communities. If there is a need for more details, I would be happy to speak about this in the next meeting.
I'm sure
if it is of interest to the agenda of this community. So I apologize. This is my first time to this meeting.
No, this is we encourage this kind of innovative intervention. So not to worry, and I'll leave it to Maylin to figure out how to factor you into the next meeting, which I will draw your attention to as March 21st, but it begins at 10:30 Eastern as opposed to 10 o'clock. Maylin, if I'm correct about that, we want to remind people that it's a half hour later than usual.
That's right. It actually is going back to the usual time, which was half an hour later, but just the last couple have been a little awkward. So this is, I would like to wrap up. Vint, thank you for 2 wonderful years. You were at the opening meeting in November of 2019. You rode the pandemic through with us, and you've given us a great start, which we will always be grateful to you for, Vint, for really caring so much and for being an absolute gentleman in every way. I always refer to you as the social engineer of the internet, not because you engineered it, you just demonstrated by your bearing and demeanor what it's like to be a good person interacting with other good people. And that model has just been an example for all of us as we move forward and try to do our best to bring forward and carry forward the legacy that has been started by all the fathers and mothers of the internet, but especially with your dedication and your concern and kindness. We must thank you.
Well, I appreciate that, Maylin. You made it easy, first of all, doing all the organizational work, and second, by inviting people that are easy to get along with. So I would say that my job has been made quite simple, but I much appreciate the good thoughts, and I wish all of you well. I will come to the meetings as I am able to. And in the meantime, as usual, I'll see you on the net.
Thank you.
Thank you, Vint.
Well, thank you, Vint. Thank you, Maylin.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Maylin, thank you for inviting me.
Oh,
bye-bye.
Pleasure.
Yeah, thank you all again, and glad to be with the community. This is my first time. I will be contributing better next time. Thank you.
Thank you, Yusuf. And Nellie Lusk and I will greet you next month.
Looking forward.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mary.
Bye.
By the way, I'm participating in the Africa Europe Summit in both the parallel sessions, the summit, Science Summit, and the real, the official one. So maybe we can meet in some of the sessions.
We will, I'm sure.
Thank you.
Yusuf.
And we'll have discussion later on. Sure. Thank you.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye bye.
Bye.
Bye bye.